On December 30th, 2006, a rope ended the life of one of the most feared men on Earth. But as the cameras turned away from Saddam Hussein's execution, they left behind a family scattered across the world, hunted, hidden, wealthy beyond imagination in some cases, and carrying the weight of a name that several governments wanted erased from public life forever. What happened to them next is a story that stretches from guarded villas in Jordan to secret locations in Lebanon, from Interpol arrest warrants to courtrooms in Baghdad. Some of them vanished completely. Others refused to stay quiet, even when staying quiet was the condition of their protection. And the fate of Saddam's own remains turned into one final, unsettling chapter in a story that has resisted any clean ending. This is what happened to Saddam Hussein's family after 2006. To understand what the family faced after December 2006, you first need to understand what they had already been through in the years leading up to it. By the time Saddam was hanged, the Hussein family was already fractured beyond recognition. His two sons, Uday and Qusay, had been killed in a firefight with U.S. forces in Mosul on July 22, 2003, 3.5 years before their father's execution. Uday had been Saddam's eldest son, originally groomed as successor until his increasingly erratic behavior made that impossible. Qusay had been the quieter of the two, placed in command of the Republican Guard, and considered Saddam's more likely heir in the final years of the regime. Their deaths shattered the top tier of the Hussein family's power structure overnight. Saddam was captured 5 months later, in December 2003, hiding in a small underground chamber near a farmhouse in Ad-Dar. He spent the following 3 years in custody before his trial concluded and the sentence was carried out. Saddam's two daughters, Raghad and Rana, had already fled to Jordan in July 2003, just days after their brothers were killed. They had arrived in Amman with 9 children between them and were placed under the personal protection of King Abdullah II. The terms of their arrangement were not formally written down, but they were understood clearly: stay quiet, stay out of politics, and the Jordanian royal family would shield them from extradition. That bargain would hold for years, but it would be tested repeatedly. Their mother, Sayyida Talfa, Saddam's first wife and cousin, born around 1935, had also fled Iraq. She had repeatedly been denied asylum in Britain. A representative for Prime Minister Tony Blair stated at the time that the British government would not consider applications from members of Saddam's family who may have been involved in human rights abuses. Most reports placed Sajida somewhere in Qatar. Others suggested she had moved between Syria, Jordan, and Mauritania at various points. Her exact location has never been publicly confirmed. Saddam's second wife, Samira Shabandar, had moved through Syria and into Lebanon under an assumed name. She had been given $5 million in cash and substantial quantities of jewelry by Saddam before their final separation, with instructions to use it only when she truly needed it. She obtained a Lebanese passport under the name Hadija and began building a new life under a false identity. Her son, Ali, whose paternity would later be publicly disputed by members of the family, had acquired his own false identity documents and was living quietly under the alias Hassan. So, when Saddam was executed on December 30th, 2006, the family he left behind was already scattered, already hiding, and already under varying degrees of legal pressure from the new Iraqi government. The execution didn't transform their situation overnight. It simply removed any remaining ambiguity about whether Saddam himself could ever return to power. For the family, it meant one door had closed permanently. And in the days and weeks that followed, each of them would begin navigating what came next in ways that were as different from one another as the lives they had led before. Of all of Saddam's surviving children, Raghad Hussein has been the most publicly visible since 2006, and the most legally embattled. Raghad was born on September 2, 1968, and was the eldest of Saddam's 5 children with Sajida. In 1983, at the age of 15, she was married to her cousin Hussein Kamal al-Majid, a man who would later become one of the most significant figures in the regime's weapons program. In 1995, Hussein Kamal defected to Jordan, taking Raghad and their 5 children with him. He was one of the highest-ranking Iraqi officials to ever defect, and the intelligence he provided to UNSCOM, the CIA, and MI6 was substantial. In early 1996, he and his brother were persuaded to return to Iraq, with Saddam providing assurances of a pardon. 3 days after their return, both brothers were dead. They were killed in what was officially described as a clan confrontation by family members who declared them traitors. The exact level of Saddam's personal involvement in the decision has never been definitively established, but the outcome was never in serious dispute. Raghad arrived in Jordan as a widow with 5 children in July 2003. She settled into a villa near the American embassy in Amman and was provided around-the-clock security by the King's forces. Her children enrolled in the King's Academy, one of Jordan's most elite private schools. By any visible measure, her life in Jordan was one of considerable comfort. But in November 2006, just weeks before her father's execution, the Iraqi government's Central Criminal Court issued a warrant for her arrest on charges of financing terrorism and supporting the Iraqi insurgency. Intelligence officials in Iraq alleged that she had used her fortune, estimated to be in the hundreds of millions of dollars, to fund militant operations inside Iraq. In August 2007, Interpol published an official red notice requesting international cooperation in locating and potentially extraditing her. The Jordanian government refused to comply. Prime Minister Maruf al-Baghit issued a public statement declaring that Raghad was under the protection of the Hashemite royal family and that her presence in Jordan was motivated by humanitarian considerations. Jordan did not surrender her. A 2014 report by the German publication Spiegel Online gave her a title that followed her for years: the Terror Godmother. The article claimed that her fortune, described as being in the double-digit millions, was being channeled toward the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, with the stated goal of eventually returning to Iraq and reclaiming political influence. Raghad denied these allegations publicly. Then, in February 2021, she broke years of relative media silence by appearing in a 6-part televised interview on the Saudi-owned channel Al Arabiya. It was her most significant public appearance in over a decade, and she used it extensively. During the interviews, she spoke about her memories of her father's rule and offered her own assessment of Iraq under his leadership, saying that many people had told her the era of his governance was a time of glory and national pride. The remarks generated immediate and severe backlash inside Iraq, where many saw them as a dismissal of the documented atrocities committed by the regime, including the massacre of Kurdish civilians in the late 1980s and the systematic persecution of Shia communities. The interviews also drew sharp responses from Iraqi government officials and political figures who called for formal legal action against her. The legal consequence came in October 2023, when a court in Baghdad's Al-Kark district sentenced her in absentia to 7 years in prison, finding her guilty of promoting the activities of the banned Ba'ath Party through her television appearances in 2021. The sentence was issued while she remained in Jordan. She has not been extradited, and as of the latest available information, she continues to live in Amman under the protection of the Jordanian crown, wanted by Iraqi courts, protected by a king, and still making her presence felt through occasional public statements. But Raghad was not the only one of Saddam's daughters navigating this uncertain terrain. Her sister Rana was living through her own version of the same story, and the two of them were keeping one another company in a city that had become, for all practical purposes, their permanent home. Rana Hussein, born July 25, 1969, is the second of Saddam's 3 daughters, and in many ways, the less visible of the 2 older sisters in Jordan. While Raghad has periodically made headlines through media appearances and court proceedings, Rana has maintained a far lower profile since her arrival in Amman. Her own history before the exile is no less complicated than her sister's. In 1986, she married Saddam Kamel al-Majid, the younger brother of Hussein Kamel, the man Raghad had married 3 years earlier. The 2 brothers were deeply embedded in the regime's security apparatus, and their marriages to Saddam's daughters placed them at the heart of the ruling family's network of power. When Hussein Kamel defected to Jordan in August 1995, Saddam Kamel went with him, and both their wives, Raghad and Rana, accompanied their husbands. Rana had 4 children by this point. The defection was significant. Hussein Kamel, in particular, had been deeply involved in Iraq's weapons development programs, and the intelligence he provided after his defection was among the most substantial that Western governments had received from inside the regime. Both couples returned to Iraq in early 1996 on the basis of Saddam's pardon. Both brothers were dead within days of their return. Despite the pardon, Saddam had reportedly made clear that though he would not pursue them personally, the brothers would receive no protection, and clan members who considered them traitors acted accordingly. Rana, like her sister, found herself a widow in her late 20s with her children and no husband. After the 2003 invasion, Rana lived briefly in more limited circumstances in Baghdad before making her way to Syria and then to Jordan alongside Baghdad. She was granted asylum by King Abdullah II under the same humanitarian framework extended to her sister. She arrived with her 4 children. Unlike Baghdad, Rana has not given major media interviews or made political statements that drew formal legal consequences. She has, however, expressed public support for her father's memory on various occasions. Iraqi authorities have listed her among individuals of interest in connection with the broader question of Ba'athist activity abroad, though her case has not reached the level of formal legal proceedings in the way Baghdad's has. As of the most recent reporting, Rana remains in Jordan. Her children have grown up in Amman. The life she has built there is quiet and private, a sharp contrast to the world she grew up in, where her father's name defined everything and opened every door. That name, in Jordan, still carries weight. But the doors it opens now are different. Meanwhile, the youngest of the 3 sisters has been living a different kind of exile entirely, and in a country that has asked far fewer questions about who she is. Of all of Saddam Hussein's 5 children, Hala is the one about whom the least is publicly known. Born in 1972 as the youngest of Saddam and Sajida's children, she grew up as the most sheltered of the 3 daughters. While Baghdad and Rana became entangled in political and marital dramas that defined the regime's inner workings, Hala remained largely removed from the spotlight, at least as far as public records show. Saddam arranged her marriage in 1998 to General Jamal Mustafa Abdallah Sultan al-Tikriti. Her husband was identified as number 10 on the U.S. military's list of 55 most wanted former officials from the regime and surrendered to U.S. forces on May 17, 2003. When the regime collapsed in April 2003 and her sisters fled to Jordan, Hala did not go with them. She took a different path. Reports at the time indicated she had gone to Qatar, reportedly together with their mother, Sajida. Almost nothing has been publicly confirmed about Hala's life since 2003. There have been no significant media appearances, no formal legal proceedings tied directly to her name in the public record, and no verified information about her activities beyond the broad identification of Qatar as her most likely place of residence. In a family where almost every other surviving member has generated headlines of one kind or another, arrest warrants, television interviews, court sentences, Interpol notices, Hala's complete absence from public life is itself a defining characteristic. She is, in many ways, the shadow of the family, the one who left the least visible trace, who maintained the deepest silence, and who generated the fewest reports across 2 decades since her father's fall from power. Whether this reflects a genuine and sustained personal choice to withdraw from public life, or simply a greater capacity for privacy in a country that has protected her identity more thoroughly than Jordan has protected her sisters, is impossible to determine from the outside. What we know about Hala is largely defined by what we don't know, and in the context of this particular family's history, that might in fact represent the most stable position of all. And yet, while 3 of Saddam's daughters have lived out their exile in relative safety, watched but protected, the story of Saddam's second wife and her son has followed a very different and far more uncertain path. Samira Shabandar was born in 1946 into a prominent Baghdad family. Before she became Saddam Hussein's second wife, she had been a teacher, reportedly to one of Saddam's own daughters, and had been married to a pilot and manager at Iraqi Airways named Nuruddin al-Safi, with whom she had 2 children. Saddam forced her husband to divorce her, and in 1986 he married her in secret while remaining formally married to Sajida Talfa. Samira's introduction to Saddam had famously cost another man his life. A valet and close confidant named Kamel Hana Gagio was believed to have arranged the introduction between Saddam and Samira, and in October 1988, During a party held in honor of the wife of Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak, Uday Hussein, enraged over his father's second marriage and its implications for his mother's status, beat Gegeo to death in front of the other guests. The incident was so severe that Uday was briefly exiled to Switzerland. Gegeo's parents and Sajida herself reportedly pleaded for Uday to be pardoned. After the fall of Baghdad in 2003, Samira made her way across the border into Syria and then traveled to Beirut, where she obtained a Lebanese passport under the name Hadija. Reports from the time indicated she was carrying approximately $5 million in cash and considerable quantities of gold and jewelry that Saddam had provided her with. Telling her to use the funds only when she was really in need, she was designated by the United Nations Security Council under Resolution 1518 in 2004, which imposed asset freezes on former members of the Iraqi regime and associated persons. She remains on multiple international sanctions lists, including those maintained by the United States, the European Union, and other jurisdictions. Since those early years after the invasion, Samira Shahbandar has largely disappeared from the public record. There have been no confirmed public appearances, no verified location, and no statements attributed to her in major media outlets. The UN and international sanctions bodies continue to list her by name. She was formally designated on April 7, 2004, under UN Security Council, Resolution 1518, which imposed asset freezes on individuals associated with the former Iraqi regime. The United States, through its Office of Foreign Assets Control, and the European Union, maintain similar restrictions on her. The legal apparatus of multiple governments continues to name her. The woman herself, however, appears to have found a way to exist outside the reach of that apparatus in practical terms. Her son by Saddam, Ali, presents an equally unclear picture. After Uday and Qusay were killed in 2003, Ali became Saddam's only surviving son, though the question of his paternity was the subject of persistent dispute within the family itself. Raghad has been reported to have publicly cast doubt on whether Ali was actually Saddam's biological child. Ali was said to have been living in Lebanon under the assumed name Hassan on a false passport, and he too was listed under international sanctions. His current status, alive, location, activities, has not been confirmed in any reliable public record. There is something striking about the way this branch of Saddam's family, the second wife and her son, has managed to achieve a degree of disappearance that the more prominent members of the family never could. Their silence is not the silence of protection, it's the silence of having genuinely slipped from view. But even in death, Saddam Hussein himself could not stay buried, at least not in the place his family put him. Saddam Hussein was buried in the early hours of December 31st, 2006, the day after his execution, in his birthplace of Al-Auja, a small village near Tikrit, approximately 3 kilometers from the graves of his sons Uday and Qusay. The burial was carried out by members of his family and tribal loyalists before dawn. The tomb that was constructed over his grave became a site of periodic pilgrimage for some Sunni Iraqis, who continued to revere him, even as the country around it was navigating the devastating violence of the post-invasion years. For several years, the mausoleum stood. It was described at the time as a relatively lavish structure, a marble octagon at the center of which flowers were regularly placed over the burial site, with an extravagant chandelier overhead. In the context of the village of Al-Auja, the tomb's construction was an unmistakable statement by those who built it, that Saddam Hussein had not been forgotten, and that those who remained loyal to his memory would say so openly. But as the sectarian violence of the mid-2000s gave way to the rise of the Islamic State from 2013 onward, the area around Tikrit became a direct battleground. By June 2014, Tikrit itself had fallen under the control of Islamic State forces during their sweeping offensive that also took Mosul and large portions of northern Iraq. Iraqi media reported that members of the local Sunni population, fearing what might happen to Saddam's remains during the intensifying fighting, removed his body from the tomb and moved it to an unknown location. The body's whereabouts since then have not been publicly confirmed. In March 2015, during the Iraqi government's offensive to retake Tikrit from Islamic State control, the tomb itself was virtually destroyed. Associated Press footage captured at the village of Uja showed the structure reduced to its bare support columns. Everything else was rubble. Poster-sized photographs of Saddam that had covered the mausoleum were gone. In their place were flags belonging to Shia militia groups and photographs of their leaders. A visual statement about who now controlled this ground. In 2023, Ragad addressed the question of her father's remains directly in a media interview, claiming that Saddam's body had been transferred out of Iraq entirely and stating her belief that it would someday be returned in a large public ceremony. No official body has confirmed the body's current location, and no timeline for any such return has been established. The fate of Saddam's remains is, in its own way, a precise reflection of what happened to his entire family after his death. Dispersed, contested, protected by some and targeted by others, and impossible to resolve cleanly. Even in death, there was no stillness for Saddam Hussein, but his resting place is still unknown, and the family that survived him is still out there, living in exile, living under sentences, living in silence. Through all of this, the legal battles, the exile arrangements, the destroyed tomb, Sajida Talfa has remained the most elusive member of the family. Born around 1935, she was Saddam's first wife, his cousin, and the mother of all 5 of his children. Their marriage had been arranged when they were children. It lasted formally until his death, even after Saddam took Samira Shabandar as a second wife in 1986. Sajida and Saddam never divorced. She refused to cede her position as his legitimate wife, and whatever private anguish the second marriage caused her, she maintained that formal status until the day he was executed. In the years after Saddam's second marriage became known, the Iraqi state media ran photographs and stories portraying Saddam as a devoted family man, clearly designed to counter the perception that his household had fractured. Sajida played along publicly while remaining almost entirely out of view. After the invasion of 2003, she fled Iraq. The British government refused to consider any asylum application from her, with a representative for Prime Minister Tony Blair stating that Britain would not accept applications from members of Saddam's family who may have been involved in human rights abuses. Most consistent reporting since then has placed her in Qatar, likely alongside her youngest daughter Hala. In July 2006, just before Saddam's execution, the Iraqi government named both Sajida and Raghad on its list of 41 most wanted individuals connected to the former regime. Sajida's inclusion acknowledged that, whatever her private role, she was not considered a neutral figure by the new Iraqi authorities. In 2015, rumors spread on social media that Sajida Talfa had died. The Hussein family publicly refuted those claims. As of the most recently available reporting, she is believed to be alive, somewhere in the Gulf region, most likely Qatar, in an existence that has been almost entirely shielded from public view. She is the only one of Saddam's wives still living for whom even approximate current circumstances are genuinely difficult to establish. Samira Shabandar has disappeared from the public record entirely. Sajida Talfa appears, by all available accounts, to be living in deliberate and sustained silence. The widow of one of the 20th century's most documented dictators, now one of the world's most effectively hidden persons. What the story of Saddam Hussein's family after 2006 amounts to is not a neat resolution. There is no dramatic final scene, no courtroom reckoning that brought the whole family to account, no moment where the world could look at the situation and say, that's settled. Instead, there is a collection of separate, continuing lives, each shaped differently by who they were, what choices they made, and how willing various governments and royal families were to protect or pursue them. Raghad remains in Jordan under the protection of a king, sentenced in absentia by courts she will not enter, still making periodic public statements about a regime that her country's government considers a crime to publicly defend. She is on Interpol's Red Notice list. She is on Iraq's Most Wanted list. She has 5 children who grew up in Amman. She has expressed publicly a desire to return to Iraq someday. As of the most recent confirmed reporting, she has not returned, and there is no indication that she intends to do so imminently. Rana lives quietly in the same city, largely absent from the news, present in Jordan, but invisible in a way her older sister has never managed to achieve. She has 4 children. She has maintained the terms of her arrangement with the Jordanian crown far more successfully than Raghad has. Hala is in Qatar, or was the last time anything credible was reported. A woman who has managed to live in such obscurity that her current circumstances are essentially unknown to anyone outside her immediate circle. Samira Shabandar and her son Ali are listed on sanctions documents in multiple countries, their actual locations unverified, their day-to-day lives unknown. They exist primarily as names on legal documents, designated, restricted, but effectively beyond reach. Sajida Talfa, the matriarch, is somewhere in the Gulf, most likely Qatar, living in a silence so complete that even her continued existence had to be confirmed by her own family when rumors of her death circulated in 2015. She is in her late 80s or early 90s. She has outlived her husband, her 2 sons, and the country as she knew it. She has said nothing publicly in decades, and Saddam himself rests in a location that only those who moved his remains actually know. The tomb where he was first buried has been reduced to rubble. The village where he was born has been through years of violent conflict. The country he ruled for 24 years is still, in many ways, navigating the long and complicated aftermath of everything that his rule, and the invasion that ended it, left behind. The family he left behind is still out there, dispersed and protected in some cases, pursued in others, aging quietly in cities that are not their own. The Hussein name carries too much history and too many unresolved questions for the story to simply close. It continues, just much more quietly now, and in places that the cameras no longer follow. The daughters who grew up in one of the world's most powerful and feared households now raise their own children in exile. The woman who was Saddam's wife for over 4 decades has become one of the world's most invisible people, and somewhere, in a location that only a few loyalists know, the man who once held the fate of an entire nation in his hands is buried. The exact spot unknown. The story still unfinished. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more history documentaries.